When Michelle Obama publicly criticized Ibrahim Traoré, no one expected what would happen next. The young president of Burkina Faso didn't issue a press release or send diplomatic cables. He went straight to his people. In a speech that would soon echo across the entire continent, Traoré reminded Africa what true sovereignty looks like. His words sparked a movement that forced even Michelle Obama to reconsider her position. This is the story of how a David stood up to a Goliath, and Africa chose sides. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. The world watched as Michelle Obama sat down for a primetime interview on CNN last month. The former First Lady spoke confidently on global affairs, but one segment caught everyone off guard: her direct criticism of Ibrahim Traoré, the young military leader who had recently assumed power in Burkina Faso. "I worry about countries like Burkina Faso," she said, her expression serious as the camera zoomed in. "When military leaders like Traoré take control during unstable times, we often see corruption increase rather than decrease. The transition process he's managing seems deeply flawed." Her words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that would soon become waves. Michelle Obama's criticism focused specifically on Traoré's governance approach. She questioned his decision to suspend certain constitutional provisions during the transition period. She pointed to reports of government opponents being silenced. She referenced intelligence suggesting increased military spending at the expense of social programs. Most pointedly, she expressed concern about what she called a troubling pattern of autocratic behavior disguised as patriotism, and questioned if the promised return to democratic rule would actually materialize. The weight of these accusations was immense, not just because of who said them, but because of what Michelle Obama represents globally. As a former First Lady who maintained approval ratings that most politicians only dream of, her words carry moral authority. She's viewed as a voice of reason and compassion. When she speaks on international affairs, people listen not just in America, but worldwide. This wasn't just any criticism. It was criticism from someone whose global influence extends far beyond politics into culture and moral leadership. Yet there was something missing in her assessment: the actual conditions on the ground in Burkina Faso. The country Traoré inherited was struggling with extremist violence that had displaced nearly 2 million citizens. Foreign companies had extracted resources for decades while local communities remained in poverty. Previous governments, despite being democratically elected on paper, had failed to deliver basic security or services to most citizens. These realities, well understood by every Burkinabe citizen, seemed absent from Michelle Obama's analysis. Western media outlets quickly amplified her criticisms. Headlines appeared across major newspapers: "Obama condemns Traoré regime." "Former First Lady questions Burkina Faso's leadership." "Michelle Obama sounds alarm on West African instability." Cable news segments featured panels of experts, most of whom had never set foot in Burkina Faso, discussing the troubling situation developing under Traoré. Social media lit up with clips of her statements, viewed millions of times within hours. For Traoré, this represented a critical moment. At 34 years old, leading a landlocked West African nation with limited resources, he now faced criticism from one of the most respected women in global politics. The pressure was immense. Traditional diplomatic protocol would suggest a measured response through official government channels, perhaps a carefully worded statement expressing disappointment while reaffirming commitment to democratic principles. Some advisors urged him to simply stay silent and let the news cycle move on. Ibrahim Traoré stood at a crossroads. The world waited to see how this young African leader would respond to such high-profile criticism. Would he become defensive? Would he lash out? Would he bend to international pressure? The choices he made in the next 48 hours would define not just his leadership, but potentially reshape perceptions of African sovereignty in the modern era. But what no one anticipated was that Traoré would choose a path entirely different from the diplomatic playbook. Instead of anger or defensiveness, he responded with something more powerful: a direct connection with his people that would soon resonate far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. As diplomats and government officials debated how to respond to Michelle Obama's criticism, Ibrahim Traoré made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of issuing a formal statement through government channels, he scheduled an address at the University of Ouagadougou. The young leader chose to speak directly to the people who represented Burkina Faso's future, its students. This move carried significant risk. International protocol typically demands that leaders respond to high-profile criticism through established diplomatic channels. By choosing to address university students instead, Traoré was effectively bypassing traditional power structures. He was gambling that connecting directly with his people would prove more powerful than any carefully worded diplomatic note. The university auditorium buzzed with energy on the day of the address. Students packed every available seat, with hundreds more gathering outside where speakers had been set up. Campus security struggled to maintain order as young people pressed forward, eager to hear their leader speak. The atmosphere combined nervous tension with undeniable excitement. This wasn't just a speech, but a moment that felt historic. When Traoré took the stage, he appeared without the military uniform that had become his trademark. Dressed in a simple white shirt, he seemed more like a teacher than a president. The auditorium fell silent as he approached the microphone. Rather than beginning with formalities, he started by speaking about his childhood in a small rural village. "I know what it means to dream of a better future while fighting to survive in the present," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He spoke of nights without electricity, of walking miles to fetch water, of watching family members suffer without access to healthcare. These weren't abstract policy concerns, but lived experiences that connected him to the struggles of ordinary Burkinabe citizens. Instead of directly addressing Michelle Obama's accusations, Traoré focused on larger questions of sovereignty and self-determination. He acknowledged the challenges facing Burkina Faso without apology. "I don't deny the challenges we face," he stated plainly, "but we also cannot allow our history to be written by those who have not lived our struggles." The students responded with thunderous applause. His speech lacked the polished diplomacy expected in international relations. There were no carefully worded statements crafted to please Western audiences. Instead, his words carried raw authenticity that resonated deeply with his listeners. When he spoke about foreign interests in Burkina Faso's natural resources, his voice didn't rise in anger, but rather conveyed a determined resolve to protect what belonged to the Burkinabe people. Behind this approach stood Fatoumata Diallo, Traoré's communications advisor. A former journalist with international experience, Diallo had helped craft a strategy that would speak beyond borders. She understood that in the age of social media, authentic communication could travel farther than any press release. Her influence was evident in how Traoré shaped his message, focused not on defending against specific accusations, but on articulating a vision for African dignity and self-determination. By the end of his address, something remarkable had happened. What began as a response to criticism had transformed into a powerful platform for asserting national identity. Students left the auditorium not feeling defensive about their country, but proud of a leader who spoke with clarity and conviction about their shared future. Videos of the speech spread rapidly across social media platforms. Clips were shared thousands of times as people throughout Burkina Faso expressed pride in their leader's words. What could have become a diplomatic crisis instead became a moment of national unity and purpose. But the true power of Traoré's words was about to be unleashed across an entire continent. As his message traveled beyond Burkina Faso's borders, it would spark something much larger than anyone anticipated. Within hours of Traoré's university address, something remarkable happened. Cell phones across Africa lit up with clips of his speech. What began as one man's response to criticism transformed into a continental movement. Social media platforms exploded with activity as the video spread from Dakar to Nairobi, from Cairo to Cape Town. The speech resonated far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, igniting conversations in homes, cafes, and university campuses throughout Africa. Young people particularly connected with Traoré's message, seeing in him a leader who articulated their own frustrations and hopes. His words about sovereignty and dignity struck a chord with millions who felt their nation's stories had long been written by others. A clear division emerged in how people responded to Traoré's words. Western media outlets and political analysts characterized his speech as a clever distraction. They questioned whether he was using anti-colonial rhetoric to avoid addressing Michelle Obama's specific criticisms about governance and democratic transition. Opinion pieces in major newspapers suggested he was playing to public sentiment rather than addressing substantive concerns. Meanwhile, across Africa, the response was dramatically different. Hashtags like #AfricanDignity and #ListenToAfrica began trending, dominating social media platforms for days. These digital rallying cries united voices from diverse countries around a shared sentiment that African nations deserve the right to determine their own futures without external judgment. Citizens from neighboring Mali posted videos expressing solidarity, while Senegalese university students organized campus discussions about the speech. In Ghana, radio programs dedicated hours to analyzing Traore's words and their significance for the continent. A popular Nigerian musician released a song sampling portions of the address, which quickly topped streaming charts across West Africa. Many African commentators noted how Traore's message tapped into a deeper historical narrative. His words resonated with generations who had witnessed the complex legacy of colonial rule and subsequent foreign intervention. When he spoke about protecting Burkinabe resources for Burkinabe people, he touched on a pain point familiar to many African nations, rich in natural resources, yet struggling economically. This moment represented something larger than one speech or one leader. It became a symbol of a new generation of African leadership, young, unapologetic, and willing to stand firm against external pressure. Political science professors pointed to this as evidence of a shifting power dynamic, where African leaders increasingly speak directly to their people rather than seeking approval from Western capitals. The groundswell of continental support eventually reached Washington. As video clips and commentary about Traore's speech circulated widely, Michelle Obama found herself facing questions about her earlier statements. The overwhelming African response to his words made it impossible to dismiss his perspective. According to sources close to the former First Lady, she began to reconsider her position, admitting that she might have underestimated the complexity of the situation. She acknowledged that it is easy to criticize from afar, but the reality on the ground is much more complex. What could have become a diplomatic crisis instead transformed into a unifying moment for African sovereignty. Traore's strategic decision to speak directly to his people rather than engage in traditional diplomatic channels had changed the narrative completely. Rather than appearing defensive or combative, he had articulated a vision that resonated across borders and generations. The story of this confrontation and response became a case study in how modern leadership can harness authentic communication to change international perceptions. By staying true to his principles and speaking from personal experience, Traore had elevated a potential conflict into a continental conversation about self-determination. But the story wasn't over. What happened next would change both leaders forever, opening a new chapter in this unexpected relationship between two very different worlds. The most remarkable chapter in this story wasn't the confrontation, but what came after. When faced with a choice between continued conflict or finding common ground, both Michelle Obama and Ibrahim Traoré chose a path few expected. They decided to understand each other. Michelle Obama took the first step. After witnessing the continental response to Traoré's words, she organized virtual meetings with African experts, historians, and community leaders. These conversations opened her eyes to perspectives she hadn't fully considered. She learned about Burkina Faso's complex challenges, the security threats, resource exploitation, and the daily struggles of ordinary citizens. She began to see that governance in such contexts couldn't be measured by Western standards alone. This path wasn't easy for either leader. Both faced pressure from their supporters to maintain their positions. Obama risked appearing weak by reconsidering her criticism, while Traoré's advisors worried that engagement might seem like capitulation to Western influence. Finding common ground after such a public confrontation required courage from both sides. The turning point came at a global leadership conference in New York focused on sustainable development. Michelle Obama took the stage with a notably different tone than in her earlier interview. "Today I want to talk about something I've recently learned," she began. "Sometimes our intentions can be misunderstood, especially when we don't fully understand the context of those on the other side. Her words signaled an important shift, a willingness to learn rather than judge. Though Traore couldn't attend in person, he sent a pre-recorded video message that played during the main panel. His words were measured yet powerful. "My message today is simple," he stated. "I do not ask for approval, but for respect. Respect for our choices, our struggles, and our vision for the future." When the video ended, many in the audience stood to applaud, moved by the sincerity of his message. Back in Burkina Faso, Traore and his team watched the conference broadcast. When Michelle Obama acknowledged her limited understanding of the African context, Traore felt relief. His communications advisor, Fatoumata Diallo, noticed his expression change. Traore simply nodded, recognizing this as a potential beginning of something new. This exchange represented something rarely seen in international politics: the willingness to listen and learn. Rather than doubling down on entrenched positions, both leaders showed that even after public disagreement, bridges could be built through honest communication. Michelle Obama's subsequent visit to Burkina Faso transformed her perspective entirely. She traveled beyond official buildings to rural communities, schools, and social projects. She heard life stories directly from citizens like Awa, a young teacher who shared her struggles and dreams. Visibly moved, Michelle responded, "You are proof that change begins with people like you." These firsthand experiences allowed her to witness what statistics and reports could never fully convey: the resilience of the Burkinabe people and the complex reality Traoré was navigating as a leader. The journey from confrontation to understanding culminated in a meeting between the two leaders in Ouagadougou. Standing together at a public event, Traoré extended his hand saying, "This is only the beginning." Michelle Obama's response was equally significant: "Thank you for teaching me." This reconciliation affected more than just their personal relationship. It opened channels for practical cooperation between American foundations and Burkina Faso's development initiatives. It created space for more nuanced discussions about governance and development in challenging contexts. Most importantly, it showed that international relationships could be rebuilt through mutual respect rather than power dynamics. As we look at the legacy of this moment, one thing becomes clear: